Hello, my name is Eric, and I am your Lord Commander. Welcome. There are many D&D monsters that strike fear into adventurers. A Beholder, the Demogorgon, a Tarrasque. But these specific monsters aren't born from darkness and death. So what specific monster could I be talking about? Well, that would be this guy right here, the Nightwalker. Not familiar with the Nightwalker? Well, we'll do a quick introduction, and then we'll get painting. There are very few reasons for anyone to tap into the energy of the negative plane. The negative plane, or the plane of death, was used when Shar created the Shadowfell. And the negative plane is extremely hostile to living things. Only undead can traverse there. It is the blackest night. It is the heart of darkness. It is the hunger that devours souls. The manual of the planes. Now, Nightwalkers are born from the negative plane, and they are created when someone unworthy tries to tap into the energy of the negative plane. Think necromancers and liches mostly. If a Nightwalker is released and the person who was pulled into the negative plane doesn't instantly die, then they would need friends who could come rescue them. I feel attacked. Now those friends would need to lure the Nightwalker back to the negative plane using life for it to consume. If the Nightwalker is killed, then the trapped can no longer escape the negative plane. The Nightwalker has a debilitating aura that drains your constitution. It uses necrotic attacks to debilitate its opponents, and can paralyze with fear. How's that for terrifying? But let's not let that stop us, because I'm incredibly inspired to paint this guy with you today using the Monsters of the Multiverse book. I went with the original color scheme from page 194, kind of that dark, shadowy blue. I began this model by starting with the base, and I really wanted him to look like he was stalking through the negative plane, looking for the next unfortunate adventurer. Using equal parts milliput hand kneaded until uniform in color for about 5 minutes, I then began smushing it all over the base of the model and the clear plastic base as well. I occasionally wetted my tools and fingers with a tiny bit of water to help smooth out the milliput. I worked it into a surface much like what came with the model. It has a dry, cracked earth texture, so I just followed that pattern and it turned out really well. Once I was satisfied with the ground, I took out my bits boxes and I grabbed 2 little wooden beads, and these are going to be used as void stones. A void stone is an area of concentrated darkness that becomes so dense that it collapses on itself. Think like a black hole of death. In game, this would count for a DC 25 Constitution saving throw. Using just a dab of Gorilla Superglue gel for some added strength, I glued the stones onto the base. Using a small amount of leftover putty, I filled in the cores of the stones and smoothed them out. So I let that set and I began picking out my colors that best matched the book art. Alright, so now we need to get some primer down, so I chose the So Flat Black from Golden Acrylics. I chose this as a primer because it's very matte, and using only 2 thin coats, it dries very quickly with great coverage. This model has such great features: huge horns, menacing stare, just its size as well. Unfortunately, it has some flaws. Most egregious was the shoulder joints, so I decided to fill them in. So I started sanding off the primer at the part of his shoulders where I knew I would need a good strong bond with the liquid green stuff. After sanding and cleaning the shoulders, I worked the green stuff into the cracks around his shoulder. I worked several coats of the liquid green stuff into the cracks until I got a nice smooth transition. I feathered out the transition areas with a little bit of water and let it dry overnight because I was working late. But technically, you could do this after about 5 or 10 minutes. Green stuff dries pretty quick. By morning, it was ready for priming, so I thinned down some Games Workshop white scar, and using 2 coats, I primed the shoulders that I had filled in with the green stuff. After the primer was dry, I started on the skin using Nightwalker Gloom contrast paint from Games Workshop. I started by covering all his skin and making sure to work the contrast paint into the recesses. I really want to get a nice dark shadow when I apply the tint in the next step. I only use one coat on this step because I intend to tint over this layer later. This helps as each layer is transparent and the color underneath will reflect back. I wanted to establish the shadows on his skin, so I grabbed some Tyrian Navy by Army Painter and mixed it with equal parts of Speed Paint Medium. I started working the paint into all the recesses, and I did this step in a single coat. The Tyrian Navy is really vibrant and did a great job creating the shadow without tinting too much of the highest points. But before I started the highlight, and this is important, you really have to paint the white areas next. His horn, his hooves, and his claws. The reason being is that white right now is the brightest color. When you're looking at that, it's going to throw your eyes off for what the highlight needs to be. So you'll paint over those white areas, which will then make the mid-tone of the skin the next brightest color. That way then you can accurately mix your colors to get a proper highlight. Using some Scape and Blight Dinge by Games Workshop, I wetted it down on a wet palette and started working on the hooves and the claws and the horns. I did this in 2 thin coats, just making sure I didn't get any paint onto the skin that I already completed. Letting that dry, I went back and started to work on the base of the model. Using Dawnstone from Games Workshop as a highlight on the ground, and using my homemade texture palette and medium dry brush from Army Painter, I brushed over all the high areas on the ground. I'm dabbing my brush onto a damp sponge and working it into the palette until I see the kind of texture and consistency that I like. Next I got some dark tone wash from Army Painter, and this stuff I really love. Really great coverage as well as really good flow. It tints so well that a lot of the times I find I only need 1 coat. Next I did some more work on the base, and I was thinking it was looking a little bit flat, so I grabbed some black acrylic paint and some ballast sand from Woodland Scenics and worked it into a little mixture and started placing it all around the voids and cracks on the base. Even though it's a place of magical death where nothing can live, it wouldn't be devoid of some earth and debris, so I thought this was a good effect. And then finally back to the highlights on his skin. What I did was mix some Nightwalker Gloom and some Blinding Light from Army Painter together on a dry palette. I did thin this down with a little bit of medium and began working it over the head, the shoulders, the muscles, and all the high points on the skin and body. Next I started painting his eyes, and I used a little bit of the white scar again to prime his eyeball. I want the Calgar blue that I'll be using for his eyes to be very vibrant. After that dried, I got out that Calgar blue and began feathering it out to give his eyes a sort of glowing effect. Now the Nightwalker has some great ethereal smoke emanating from his back. The best way to tackle these features are with some alcohol ink. I picked out Nightwalker Blue for his ethereal smoke and began covering the entire effect. I don't mind if some gets onto the skin, as it'll blend a little as it dries and help sell that the effect is born from his body. Now moving on to the void stones that we created with those wooden beads, I'm using a very special paint, Musou Black, which is very similar to the Viral Black 3.0. It is an ultra pigmented black that absorbs about 99.4% of light. What's great about this paint is it's acrylic, it works fantastic as a brush on, and is also recommended to be used in an airbrush. I got a link in the description for that as well. I painted the void stone using 2 coats, and I didn't thin this down. I kind of wanted to see what the full effect would be using this paint for the first time. I bet if I would have thinned this down with some water and maybe did more than 2 coats, I probably could have got a little bit of better effect on the void stones. But hey, that's part of the fun. Trying out new paints, experimenting with new things. Next time, we'll see how it comes out. Now for some more fun and experimenting on the base. Now the negative plane is a place that absorbs all light, life, and magic. It's really just pure darkness and death. And I wanted to get a little bit cooler of effect on the base here. So I pulled from my shelf some extreme power thin super glue. I then applied it over the sandy texture that we created earlier. It will dry very glossy and give great contrast to the dark, flat void stones. And last but not least, I grabbed the Dawnstone again and did a small dry brushing on his horns. I just wanted to give them a little bit more depth. Not too much, as there's no light in the negative plane, and I want the focal point to remain on his skin. And after that last dry brushing step, our Nightwalker is complete. I really loved working on this model. It has such great detail, especially that alien-looking head and his terrifying presence. I hope this video has inspired you to paint your own Nightwalker model from your pile of shame, or to head over to your local game shop and pick up a new one for you to use in your own campaigns. Now thanks again everyone for watching. Now please, if you enjoyed the video, give it a like, and make sure to subscribe to the channel for future content. Happy painting and take care. Look at this guy!